Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hey, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name's Chris Flisher, and we're back to astrology today. This is a wonderful topic. I always love astrology. I have been studying it for years. Always fascinates me, and in my travels, I come across many people who are also fascinated with astrology, which is great because you get two astrologers in the room, or even if you get a room full of astrologers, we all know what we're talking about, which makes the conversations much easier than if you're trying to talk to your next door neighbor about it who doesn't believe it. So it's much easier. Anyway, my guest today is Dietrich Pessin. She is almost exactly the opposite of me. I'm an Aries, she's a Libra, and so we have a natural synergy, and we're good friends, and we've been running across each other in many different conferences and talks about astrology, and I've always wanted to get her on my show here to talk about it. She is an expert in eclipses. I know eclipses have a certain magical appeal to them, and everybody runs for the hills when they hear that word, but they can really be quite revealing and game-changing and significant events in a person's life when they happen at a significant point in their lives.
Right. Even if they are not exactly stirring up things in your life, they're planting a seed somewhere in your life. So each and every eclipse that happens is going to, in some way, impact your life, whether it be in a mild way or in a dramatic way. You mentioned that your son is getting married, and his wife-to-be, is it her son?
Her son, yeah, her ascendant has the eclipse on her ascendant.
So the eclipse will occur on the point that's called her ascendant, which is the rising sign in a wheel. And that's always an indication of the coming and going or changing of relationships, changing partners, changing status, going from single to married, something like that.
It's a great time of transition because it's the end of the 12th house, the beginning of the first. It's sort of the new doors opening, the old doors closed. It's really symbolic. I think it's just...
Well, you know what's interesting about eclipses is that the next eclipse will occur in her 12th house because they go backwards around the wheel. And so she had been having eclipses in her 1st and 7th house probably for a couple of years, bringing this relationship into focus,
into fruition,
and then the activity, the marriage will happen to emphasize it, and then it goes to 12th and 6th house, which puts her her focus on something different, say for instance on her work, or some kind of self.
I think she's getting up to the point where she's getting ready to be tenured. She's a teacher, so that might be a significant event that would happen at that point. So when we're talking about eclipses and their relevance to people, rather than have people be worried about what eclipses bring, why don't you try to explain to us some of the things that we can expect from an eclipse if it happens in a significant part? And the way you would find out the significance of the eclipse in your chart would be to contact someone like Dietrich and get a reading done so you would know exactly where those eclipses were happening so you could prepare yourself. When we're best prepared, when we're best informed, we're best prepared, as I always say. So what are some of the things that we could expect?
Well, and being prepared for is not to expect that there's going to be trouble.
Right. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah. I mean, in ancient times, you can read some ancient material where there was some great big battle and there was this eclipse in the sky and the moon turned blood red. Well, that would have been a lunar eclipse for one thing. During a solar eclipse, you don't see you don't see things the same way. The solar eclipse is going to have the moon pass over the face of the sun, and the Earth is on one side, where a lunar eclipse, you're going to have the Earth in the middle. So you're going to have the Earth in the middle and the sun and the moon opposite to one another. So the block is the Earth. I call that a grandstanding event that's going to happen with that type of thing with a lunar eclipse, because a solar eclipse is the beginning, the start of.
Right.
These are new events. They are the seed stage. They bring the quality of brand new, startling shift and change with exciting new elements that come into your life in a seed stage. Now, there can certainly be times when a strong event can happen, such as a promotion or a car accident. Sometimes people have, too much energy, and then they go out and they're in a high energy space, and then they're not processing this or expelling the energy in a harmonious way,
Right.
and so then there can be sort of a collision of sort. So there have been, like, there was this one woman who did have an accident on her birthday, on the day of a solar eclipse, and it actually leads right into the material that's in Lunar Shadows. And she went to the doctor, she went to the hospital, and they said, "Oh, you're fine. You just have a mild concussion, do this and that." She had horrible, horrible, horrible headaches for 9 months.
Wow.
And she then went back to the doctors over a period of time, and she got herself a new doctor who she could revisit, because when you're in the emergency room, you
Right.
can't
You don't know. You can't see them again.
you can't revisit.
Right,
So he continues to tell her, the new guy says, "No, there's nothing wrong with you, go home, you're fine." Well, in 9 months, she was in such a really bad shape that she needed to continue to find out what was wrong with her. She was completely debilitated. And then over that following 9 months, she then found another doctor that said, "Oh my God, you have this terrible situation with all this fluid on your brain."
Oh, like encephalitis or in the brain, yes.
And that's what's causing all the headaches. And at any rate, at the fourth leg of the moon phases, which I'll explain a little better in a minute, she had to have an operation.
To relieve the water in the
Right,
brain.
right.
Yeah.
So there can be also a series of events where, for instance, you buy a house.
Yeah.
And
Have a baby, or get married. I had some incredible experiences that have been very positive on eclipses.
Yes.
Chance meetings of people, things that have been very positive, and I think that's sort of the myth I'm trying to dispel, is that not always something negative happens
Right.
in an eclipse.
Right.
One of the things that I find to be the most fascinating about an eclipse is that mathematical precision of this. It certainly gives credence to the divine order. When we see the sun, which is a gigantic orb, 93 million miles away, and the moon passes in front of it, and it fits it exactly, and it's
Right.
only 250,000 miles away, but from our view on Earth, it's just there. And that precision, you have to believe somebody's in charge.
Right, right.
I mean, you couldn't have designed that yourself. I mean, it's just absolutely astounding.
So it's the distance where we sit from the moon that
Right.
allows that moon to completely cover the face of the
Exactly.
sun.
That's got to do with alignment.
Yes.
I mean, and
Yes.
it's poetic, I
Yeah.
think. It's just divine poetry.
Yeah.
But to get back to the idea of the eclipses, so they typically, it's not as if it's a boom kind of event where something happens when the eclipse goes exact. There's usually a window of opportunity, correct? There's usually a time frame when we might see certain things manifest. That's not to say that it can't happen on that day. You may bump into somebody who gives you a book contract, and away you go, and you're on your way in your career. That would depend upon the house and the placement in the chart or the planet that it is aspecting, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's also, from a mundane perspective, like from a global perspective, there was an eclipse in December of 2000. And that solar eclipse was the defining line that brought in George Bush as president. The Supreme Court made that decision to choose him over Al Gore. 9 months later, there was 9/11 had occurred. 9 months after that, they were all you know,
Getting
scrambling,
ready.
trying to put together.
Saber rattling, yeah.
Yeah, saber rattling for war. 9 months later, exactly, they did go to war. 9 months after that, they dragged Saddam Hussein out of his little spider hole.
So that repetitive pattern of 9 months is indicative of the arc of influence of the solar eclipse?
Yes, yes. Oh, yes.
And then the point of the solar eclipse. So the solar eclipse happens at a certain degree, a mathematical degree. It's that degree point that is then, if it's then triggered by a planet in aspect later on, that can also create an event.
Yes, and there's only so many degrees in the zodiac where an eclipse can happen. And there's a page in the book that'll show you. So if you have your...
By the way, here's the book. I'm just going to hold it up real quick. This is Dietrich's book. It's called Lunar Shadows. You can get this from her website, which is up on the screen, and also on Amazon. It is a book, I will tell you, that is good for astrologers, and it may be, but it is also accessible to the average person who's interested in learning more about their astrology. But you might want to seek out some advice from Dietrich in doing so.
Thank you. And on page 75, for instance, there's, it's way too small to show the camera, but it shows you how there are these scattered spots around the zodiac where eclipses will occur. Those are also the spots where lunar phases occur.
Interesting.
And not these empty spots of the zodiac. So if you have planets, if you were born with your planets on eclipse degree, so we have 10 planets, and we have an ascendant and a midheaven, which are very, very powerful points, and the nodes of the moon. Those are where the eclipses take place. That's where the sun and the moon will line up with that lunar node. The lunar node is that link to the Earth, which has us all line up. And if you have an eclipse on one or more or several of the points in your wheel, then you'll have probably a lot of activity in your life where you are responding to change. You know, you're probably, I find very few people have really like bad things happen to them. Very few people.
But they are life-changing, which can be very good. Life is about change. So,
they get a promotion.
They get the transfer, they have children, they buy a new house, they meet someone who gives them a career. Any number of wonderful possibilities are there.
Right.
And I think much of what we talk about in astrology is the concept of transition. And I like to put this out for people who worry about the sort of transitions. I always say transition is moving from one state to another where we have to go. And many people always seem to run to the idea of fear in that regard. And I want to dispel that by saying the end of a pregnancy delivers what? It delivers a baby. So that is a transition, a perfect metaphor for what change is about and what change can portend.
Right, right.
So
we had an eclipse at 29 degrees of Pisces, which was right at a very powerful point of 0 degrees Aries.
Right.
And so that one might have brought every single one of us something exciting and stimulating in our lives, something that shifts it can be as much as it shifts your thinking. You know, let's say you've been in a really gloomy winter like we had here in New England, and we're stuck in with 9 feet of snow, and we're all we're suffering from cabin fever, and along comes this eclipse, and it just is enough to give you a spark to bring you...
Very powerful eclipse. I mean, that is the literal end of the zodiac, and also the literal beginning of the zodiac. So it had to be monumental in some process. And as a result of that, we see ourselves in a period of change where, like, I think your point of, you know, sort of how we think is dramatically changed. I think we are, as a species, finally coming to terms with some of the havoc we've wrought. We sort of are getting to that spot where we're like, gosh, we really have to wake up and pay attention. And I think these are sort of the squares that in astrology, I've mentioned this before, we talk about the squares, these times where there's trial and conflict. But if we don't have conflict, we can't progress.
Right.
If the roof doesn't leak, we're not going to fix it. But when the roof is leaking, we must fix it.
But also, too, like I have a friend, she's a realtor, and she's also an astrologer. We will both look for good squares to get the property moving.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's when, You know, when you just have a nice trine, people just drive by, oh, nice for sale sign. But if you have a square, people come to that point and they stop and they investigate, and it brings them in. Squares are positive because they hit you broadside. So you're thinking in one direction, and when you get hit with this new thought that comes in on the side, then that's when you get this invitation to change or go for something that you've been looking for. You know how like when you have in your mind, I'm looking for something, and there you see it, you know, somehow or another on your travels. It could be along the side of the road, you know.
Exactly. And what the squares do is they require your attention.
Yes.
You cannot avoid them. They require attention, and that comes from action. And I think your analogy is very good. The sort of the trines in the chart, and these are astrological terms that any astrologer could explain to you. They're the easy things. Most people, when I show them their chart and they see all the red lines, they're like, oh my gosh, all these squares. I say, this is your jewel box, because this is where you're going to get all your process. And anybody who's famous, we see these enormous squares there because those are the motivating factors. They're like the steps. You think of climbing up a stair ladder, up a set of steps. You up and up, up and up. Those are 90-degree angles. That's what we're talking about. And those are where we really find evolution and progress, which is our goal, I think, on this planet, is to evolve to something greater, better, you know, newer, improved.
So that brings to mind these squares. Now we had this solar eclipse at 29 degrees of Pisces, and then the next one's going to be at 20 Pisces. So they back up, you know, at a late degree, and it's backing up. So the next really exciting moon phase will be at a 90-degree square to that first solar eclipse of 20 Pisces. So that'll occur, it's coming up next week, at 20-some degrees, 23 degrees of Gemini.
Gemini.
Gemini. That's what I call a PowerPoint new moon.
And that's when the moon is at that point, which is then squaring the point of the eclipse. So we're looking at the 20 degrees of Pisces, and then what we look is for a square to that, which would be in another mutable sign, which would be Gemini, Sagittarius, or Virgo. In this case, it's going to be Gemini. So we're going to have that squaring action, which will then force a function.
It's actually at 25 Gemini. It's next Tuesday, so on the 16th. Look for that time to notice your story changes. So it's like this, you know, since the 20th of March, when that eclipse happened, we've been had a certain mindset, doing a certain number of things, trying to get together to make some changes and new events and move forward with goals. And then comes the 16th of June, when there's a new moon, square to that point, and then it's also square to the next eclipse. And it's a breaking point, and it says, out with the old, in with the new.
And new moons always herald and are the bringer of new things in life. So they're good for that. And it's a great day to set intention. What you would do is you'd want to find out where that was in your chart. Which house does that fall in your chart? That might be where you set intention for a new way forward. It would be very valuable for that regard. And this is so you want to. I often think of eclipses as like momentum, or, you know, and you want to have, if there's momentum going, or potential is another word. If potential is in existence, you want to sort of grab onto that Ferris wheel or whatever, the merry-go-round, what's going around, and have it carry you in the right way.
Another thing about new moons, though, is that I always advise clients to start new things closer to a first quarter and a full moon.
Oh.
Not a new moon.
The waxing.
You're in the dark at the new moon. So there's all sorts of things that are happening in an invisible fashion, because the moon is invisible. So you're missing a very big piece of information, and you're missing the light. We have to remember that the moon lights the sky at night. So when there's no light of the moon at night, you're lacking information to make complete, full, advised decisions. So like couples that get married on a new moon, there's something about each other
It's unclear.
they don't know.
Something hidden.
Something hidden. Then
So it would be the first quarter, be the waxing moon, the waxing gibbous moon, which would allow you to have that.
allows you to have some insight.
Some insight. Get some.
And then go right to the full moon, but not after, just before the full moon. And then you have the maximum amount of growth, and that's when you want to, launch your store or launch your website, is when it's just before the full moon. And then all the cards are on the table. Everybody can see you.
Mm-hmm.
You launch a business on a new moon, nobody will find you.
Full transparency, what you're looking for. You want to be able to be seen at a time like that.
Right.
Very valuable.
And same thing with weddings.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to see each other as who you really are and know what's the package.
Yeah.
What do you have here?
Have you noticed in your work what it's like for people who are born on eclipses? Do you notice anything special about them?
They usually get pulled into high-profile careers, or they have a high-profile placement in the family, where they, family's a very interesting thing. We have all sorts of families. We have all these different types of family dynamics, and each person has their own role, and the person with the eclipse might be the dominant character in that family. It could be as much as a family thing. The mom who stays home and cooks in the old days, right? She goes to church and she prays every single morning, and she comes home and she tells her children to pray. She may seem like she's not doing much out there in the world, but she's molding.
Right. By virtue of her being there and acting, she is leaving an impression.
Right. And she's molding her children to follow her
example.
guide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. She's living by example.
So she's dynamic. She's more dynamic than she would ever appear. If you have somebody in the office who is born at the time of a solar eclipse, they may be the boss. They may certainly have an important role in the business. If you have, there's also this thing called progressions.
Right.
And if you have a progression, which means that your chart is slowly ticking.
Just like moving through time, as your chart moves through time, as I mentioned in many episodes about this Helios, the progressions are, we take the sun and we move it 1 degree each year. And so we sort of, as we move through life on this giant corkscrew that I keep talking about, we are down the road further, so we essentially take on the characteristics of a different sign, perhaps.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have a progressed eclipse in your chart, you might be in for very big positive changes. Now, via progression, these things move slowly, all right? So you have some clue that change is coming. Very often, people go into a bit of a confused state just before a new moon occurs in their progressed chart. They don't know what direction to go in. They don't know how to deal with what's up in their life. And then the eclipse occurs, and something comes to them in a big, big way. And they invite big change. So,
which can be very, very positive. I want to reiterate that, because change is, as I mentioned in other cases, we are oftentimes more comfortable with that which is familiar simply because it is familiar. And when we're with familiarity, we know the outcome, even though it may not be pleasant. And I think part of the process that we all need to address as human beings is the ability to take that leap of faith, jump and the net will appear, as I say. And what that does is it allows us to see that perhaps that chance that we took, unknowing what the outcome would be, allows us to say, wow, why did I wait so long? I mean, this has happened to us. It's happened to me. Like, why did I wait so long to do this? What was wrong with me? That is a very clear indication, I think, of the ability to step into that. And it may be true for your relationships. People oftentimes will suffer a relationship or a job that they're not happy with for that same reason, and then they throw their resume out there and take a chance, and they wow, why did I wait so long?
Right. Fear.
Fear.
They're held back by fear, and an eclipse will help to cut off or cut out some of that fear, so that you just say, I'm going to take that shot, and I'm just going to see what I can find out there.
I mean, if you think about it, what have you got to lose in the long run? I mean, there's always a price, I suppose, you pay for taking a chance, but ultimately, I think if your gut, and I would always adhere to that sort of that intuitive gut feeling that you have. If your gut's behind it, more often than not, you're going to be okay with it, I think, because your gut is not really going to lie to you ultimately. It's sort of your inner soul saying, hey, this is time to make a change. You know, when we look at the moon in the course of any month, I'm very cognizant of the placement of the moon at any point in time, particularly by the day, simply because of the virtue that I can feel my moods ebb and flow as that happens. Now, I happen to have my moon in my chart is in Cancer, so it's a very sensitive moon anyway, but all of us are prone to those sort of sways, much the way the tide comes in and goes out. We know that we have those good days, and the moon does explain a lot of that, especially if you're with an astrologer who understands. You can figure out why perhaps things happen. And I often do that retrospectively. I often look back, say, gee, I had an argument with my girlfriend last night. What was that all about? And I go back and say, oh, gee, Mars opposing moon. That may have been it. Right. And, you know, we see these patterns begin to develop, and they're right on the money.
Right, right. Sometimes big events occur, and they do nothing to change your life. You know, I'm amazed at, we just came through this series of these huge events, Uranus square Pluto,
right.
And there were seven of them. So we got 7 opportunities to experience this push and change and dynamic, you know, unsettling change. And I swear, from everything that's happened since they've let go of their last event, that they were holding us together. Because there's so many things that are now happening that are more of a description of the energy of those two planets. And much like when eclipses will occur, and you'll see eclipses occur in people's charts and say, oh, this looks like this is going to be quite an active time, and you're looking at the kind of person in the chart, maybe they're a Taurus. Maybe they're, you know, someone who doesn't appreciate great change quickly.
Right, or slow to change.
Yeah.
Very resistant.
And nothing happens to them. Nothing changes. Nothing changes.
But I also think that a seed is planted that may evolve, and you know, like you mentioned, the Uranus square Pluto's. I think Pluto square Uranus. I think that seeds have been planted that have yet to fully manifest. I think we are in the process of that unfolding. I think sort of like that was a strike in the road that, you know, sort of frozen in time. That
well, that's where we can see where the moon goes into the sign where those planets are, or opposite or square. So when the moon is in Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, it will still set off that square that happened in March, and then it began 2012?
Right, yeah.
2012, June 24th of 2012. Yeah. But what I wanted to say, too, is that you may not see any sign of what the eclipse is doing in your life, but then when there's a moon phase that sets it off, then something happens that's relevant.
Right.
It may not have the spark or the push or the shakeup that it would have had if there was an event on the day of the eclipse, you know, or around there. An eclipse has a season. 2 weeks before the eclipse and 2 weeks after, there's an eclipse season there. And there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it.
That's okay.
And that would be that there is a full moon 2 weeks before a solar eclipse and 2 weeks after. One of those full moons, sometimes both of them, are likely to be lunar eclipses. So there's this real high energy period during that time.
Thank you, Dietrich, for coming out. We're running out of time. We're going to come back and do another time with you, and I appreciate you coming on. We've run out of time. Dietrich Pessin, her name is on the screen, and you will see it there. And I encourage you to seek out and get some advice, and we'll be back again with her.